Okay, so this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. It is November 1st, 2019, 8:04 p.m. And I'm ready to do the news, so here we go.
South Korea's national news agency says Washington is seeking to amend its alliance with Seoul in hopes of joint military action anywhere in the world when U.S. security is threatened. The current version specifies a Korean Peninsula contingency as a scope of their combined operations, but the U.S. has proposed expanding it further to cover cases that the U.S. regards as threats to its own national security. South Korea reportedly voiced opposition to the idea. Activists in Seoul also voiced their opposition, arguing that the proposed amendment would require a commitment from South Korea to engage in ongoing conflict.
So nobody wants to pitch in, huh? Poor Trumpy. I mean, he's losing allies in Europe especially, trying to get them, except for Germany. Germany seems to be in a big hurry to militarize. Gee, I wonder why. I mean, all growing up, I was told that Germany wasn't even allowed to have any kind of army or anything, and Japan wasn't allowed to have any army. So the United States has maintained its alliances by footing much of the bill. And all these countries have kind of tolerated it because it was a source of money, and because they could put more money into social, like healthcare and schooling and, college and stuff like that. But he's told Europe they're going to have to double or even quadruple military spending. The people know how this works because their country's banks, like Germany and England, have a long history of imposing austerity on countries around the world. It's subjugated. So they're not stupid. If the U.S. forces them to spend more money on the military and or stupid endeavors, then their people will pay the price. So, I mean, they've maintained a certain level of, income for their people. And they know that it'll just stir up problems if they start cutting back on those in order to appease Trump. I mean, Korea will likely be ruined by spending as much as he wants them to spend. It's just, it's more of the same thing as far as the capitalists go. He's going to squeeze everybody for every dime he can get out of them. And then he'll squeeze the American people too. He'll let some of it spill over into the rich or the middle class where he's got his base, or upper middle class. But the people on the street, the average American, it won't help them in the least. So this is American Muslim Public World Affairs Council. And, actually I blocked the chick. So this girl was trying to tell me that she's like a big Bernie fan and everything, but I looked at her page and it was all Barack Obama and establishment Democrat. And unfortunately I blocked her, so I can't show you what she said. But here's what I said to her, because she was trying to poke me in the ribs with the Trump thing, what would do you want Trump to be president? You know how they do it? They try and shame us, you know. And I said, yes, I would. He's worked out great. He's kept Hillary out of the White House, where she would have used her power as President of the United States to destroy the progressive movement. You're not a progressive, Lisa. You're my enemy, but I will give you a voice, so maybe you can see the folly of your way. It's Bernie or bust, or another true progressive. And more progressives are being educated to know when you throw another fake progressive like Obama at us, and it won't work. And just like you were such hard asses towards Bernie and his supporters in 2016, well, just multiply that times infinity. Yeah, that's what we're going to do to you. And there's far more of us than there are of you now. Talib and Omar also endorsed Bernie because we're on a Muslim. So get some of the people on our side. It looks like a typical establishment Democrat profile to me. That's her profile on Facebook, which I know no longer can access, so I can't show you.
From the national headquarters of RT America, right here in our nation's capital. Hello again, everybody.
So, I think I explained to you this situation yesterday or the day, yesterday. So if you were watching yesterday, then you know. But let's hope I've got some new viewers by now. So the landing gears were too short. So when it would land, it had dangerous, like it would rub the ground, and it was definitely going to crash planes sooner or later. So they raised up the engine into the wing. Well, that threw off the whole design. All they had to do was make the landing gear longer. I don't know why that's such a problem, and then you don't have to screw with the flight software to make it compensate for the fact that the design's totally off. And they can't seem to hear me on this, I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Let me check. Yeah.
And joining us now is Professor Richard Wolff, the founder of Democracy at Work, and he also hosts the Economic Report, a very popular show, by the way, which I have a tendency to listen to myself when I go jogging oftentimes in the morning. So it's good to see you again. Professor, can you make us understand, as difficult as I know as this task may be, to help us as Americans
Okay, so let me explain the economics to you. Richard Wolff's an excellent economist, but I had a lot to say about this. The U.S. has not... Well, that's not it. Okay, we need higher production. You know what I mean? We need to produce more goods. Capitalism isn't doing that. It's not producing or distributing more goods. They talk about this wonderful productivity. Well, isn't that supposed to mean that we're producing more stuff? So then if we were doing that, all we would have to do is distribute it. So give money to people so they can buy it. give people jobs so they can buy it or whatever. So, and on a worldwide level, we need a lot more agriculture. And the United States used to be the, the king of agriculture. I mean, we were just got so good at it. And then maybe not, because it seems to me like what we're doing, the kind of agriculture we were doing was unsustainable. So what is it, capitalists? Can we make more stuff or not? So, we need basic goods and services for all the people in the world. So we need to produce a whole lot more and get it out to them. And we need equal distribution of these basic goods and services. So diapers and, just everything you need to have a decent standard of living, right? So equal distribution, better recycling, second use, more goods, less trash, better utilization of recycling in the home. That makes everything go farther, which means, so like if you make everything go twice as far, then you're producing twice as many goods, right? So we need will give us the time, if we take those actions, it'll give us the time to deal with all of this, insecurity, scarcity of goods. For instance, Americans and their throwaway culture has to end. I mean, I don't live like an American. I don't live like anybody in my neighborhood. I don't live like almost most of the people in my city. I cook every night, and I don't go out to McDonald's ever. I haven't been to fast food in forever. The only time I've been to a restaurant is when, there's a birthday or something and we do something special. I drive my car, well, I'm retired, so I can get away with this, but I'm retired in poverty, right? I only get $245 a month, but at the same time, there's not much that I have to pay for. So, but I drive like at the most 2 or 3 times a week, and a lot of times I go 2 weeks without driving. I go and I do all my shopping at once, and I try to avoid having things to take care of. So I try to avoid doctor's appointments. I try and make my doctor's appointments do as much for me as possible while I'm there, so I don't have to do a lot of them. But they're a problem. They do cost money for gas. And, I make a tank of gas last a month. And America's really, you really got to stop having fun. Your idea of fun is going out at least every Friday and Saturday night and driving here and driving there and driving everywhere. Well, can't we figure out a way to have fun in our own neighborhoods? Where maybe you just drive down the street or something. Can we make friends in our neighborhoods and stuff like that? And just all the stuff we do. We fill up our garbage cans with plastic and paper and everything, and you don't clean it. And I have literally not thrown anything out in the garbage in 2 or 3 years. I clean everything. Like if like I'm cooking chicken tonight, right? And there's a styrofoam thing that comes with it. I wash it off. In fact, somebody asked me if I had one just a few minutes ago, so I'm actually going to give it to them because they use it in their arts and crafts. But I use them too. In the spring, I'll use them to sprout seeds. And you know all those little containers you get kind of bunched together like for cookies and things like that? I actually grow plants in them. And my milk cartons, I use them to microwave stuff. You know, as long as you don't get them too hot. But that kind of plastic is really tough, and it doesn't bleed or anything like that. You don't get any of it in your food. Um, you know, I use like cottage cheese containers, like the round ones, 16 ounce, and the bigger ones that are 24 ounce, for cups. And I use them like when I cook a lot, and I take the leftovers and I put them in those containers and I put them in my freezer, and they're better than any TV dinner or anything. As a matter of fact, man, the TV dinner's pretty bad. I'm just going to cook my own from now on. I mean, these, like, if you go to Myers or Kroger's or wherever and you buy these pre-made hamburgers or chicken sandwiches and everything, they're really no good. I mean, they don't even compare to making your own and then putting them in the freezer and eating them later. So, you know, I mean, I've really, like I say, I haven't thrown away anything in ages. Now, it's piling up in my attic, I admit, but if I ever get too much, I'll just take it to the recycling center and get paid for it. If I can't find a place to pay me for the stuff that I've cleaned and everything, then I guess I'll be kind of screwed, right? But hopefully there'll be a recycling center somewhere where, you know, I mean, you know, these recycling centers, they just take your stuff. They just come and pick it up and take off with it. They ought to pay for it, man. They ought to pay for it. It's not like they're not making money off of it. And, okay, so the simple truth is, in the end, people are having too many babies, at least for now, right? Nobody's taking the time to ask the important questions. You know, how many people will the earth sustain? And do we want to get rid of all the wild animals just to sustain them? Maybe we want to reduce the population just so that we can save some of the wild animals. At least I think I would like to do that. Yeah. And it's true what I wrote right there. The simple truth is men don't want to control their dicks and women don't want to control, you know, their vaginas, right? It's instincts, and people don't want to progress, advance beyond a lot of their instincts because our body rewards us with drugs. Our mind produces drugs, and when we orgasm or what have you, then it releases them. And we're just as addicted to that as somebody's addicted to cocaine or pot or something like that. Anyway, I don't actually watch Rick Sanchez, but Richard Wolff was on.
Understand this perplexing was a part was to overcome the breakup of Europe into many little countries that ended up creating the worst.
Okay, I'm not interested in that really. Where is this thing on the Watchmen? I suppose I'll run across it sooner or later. If I don't, then maybe I'll talk about it. So the Watchmen had this scene with a town in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, and white people bombed it and just massacred and burned down the whole thing. And I say, let's rebuild Black Wall Street in Tulsa. As a matter of fact, I would like to start like a thing to raise money to rebuild Black Wall Street. I mean, what a kick in the teeth that would be to all the fucking racists in Tulsa. Because I lived in Tulsa, and I can tell you, white racists moved to Tulsa just because it's Tulsa, because they did that back in the 20s. My dad, he moved us there because he's like trying to make everybody see how great Tulsa is because they burned out the blacks. I mean, that's been kind of his whole life. Racism and stuff. Now, he's not an out-and-out racist, like he doesn't just hate black people. I mean, he used to hire black people to work for his company and stuff like that. Whereas here in Kentucky, lots of the people who own businesses will not hire black people. How do they get away with it? Don't ask me, man. I don't know how they get away with it. It's fucked up. But yeah, I would really like to raise money. I mean, imagine if you rebuilt that Black Wall Street in Tulsa and had a whole section of town where there was a whole bunch of rich black people all, running their own business successfully and stuff. That would really, and not only that, but it would reverse what was done to them back then. I mean, this is something that the legal system should have taken care of, right? It should have gone after all the white people and who did that, and I don't think we can. They're probably all dead now, so we can't throw them in jail or whatever, punish them. We could maybe punish some of their descendants, though, right? If descendants are sitting on money that they made by burning the blacks out and then creating their own wealth, that money could be up for grabs.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of ISIS.
It probably took him a half an hour of coaching just to be able to say his name right. We didn't create Daesh, We have supported moderate Sunnis in Syria from the beginning. Okay, the CIA has been in there working with al-Nusra. Al-Nusra is not Daesh. Al-Nusra has never carried out a terrorist attack against any American or European assets or anything like that. Al-Nusra, and now they're called Sham, Tahrir al-Sham. All they're doing in Syria is trying to overthrow the beast Bashar. And my fellow progressives jump all over them, and yeah, they used to get some support because they say, oh, the United States is trying for regime change. Well, no, al-Nusra is trying to get regime change because the beast Bashar has murdered over 500,000 people, and I'll bet you it's more like 1 million. Eventually we'll find out, because they're just putting people in prisons and sending them to the hangman. So, just because America, the assholes like Trump, the neocons, just because their interests happens to fall in line with Sunni Syrians doesn't mean that they're, well, how do I put this? I mean, the Sunni Syrians are desperate. They've been murdered and out of existence just about, Well, not really. There's over 20 million of them in and around Syria. Now they're all refugees, right? There's at least 5 or 6 million of them are at least refugees. And within Syria, I'm going to go ahead and throw up the map. So, most of them are displaced into Idlib, and now, with Erdogan creating this safe zone here, like, I don't know, a year ago or something, more than that maybe, then now they've got more of them because he's moving their refugees, Syrian refugees, into his safe zones that he's created. And he's created schools and even college and housing, everything. He's trying to get these people out of his country because his Turks are tired of the refugees being in their country because they feel like it's a burden and that it's affecting the economy. And the last election was kind of a referendum on whether they wanted all these Syrian refugees in their country. And they don't. Nobody wants tons of, disenfranchised people within their borders. I mean, we're kind of experiencing the same thing here. We don't want to have to take care of all the poor people from Mexico because, we can't even take care of our own people. So you get all these people, and now he's creating these safe zones through here, and he's going to extend it all the way across here. Now, is Erdogan likely to move in at some point in the future? Well, I hope so. But he may and he may not. It's hard to say. Because you see, this is all Sunni Arab. I mean, there's a small part over here that basically belonged to the Kurds. But, the United States backing the Kurds taking over all this was just a stupid mess. So what was I talking about? So Daesh. Okay. Daesh refers, it basically refers to the negative aspects of like hillbilly Muslims. They've just got this real backwards way of thinking about everything, and it's not good. I mean, I'm just going to admit that it's not good. You've met Christians who just won't leave you alone until you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, right? You've met people like that. Well, they're kind of the same thing, except for they might kill you if you don't accept Muhammad. I mean, that's just the radical side of Islam, and it's not true Islam. I mean, I grew up with Muslims, and some of them you wouldn't even have known they were Muslim unless they told you. I never saw them pray or anything. And my best friend in college was Pakistani Muslim. He was actually one of the sects, I forget, but one of the looser sects. But he was totally cool, man. We used to trip together. We used to drink together, and Muslims aren't supposed to drink. We used to chase women all the time. Except for not very many women are attracted to, the kind of swarthy looking Pakistani. But he was a good looking guy. I thought he was a good looking guy. I could show you what he looked like. Well, no, I'm not sure if I have the pictures. Oh, I do know I have the pictures, but in my pictures on my computer. I don't have them on. I may not have them on Facebook.
The most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world.
ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS. Okay? He's the founder. He founded ISIS. And I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton.
In effect, the United States created ISIS. We created it. It's ours. And now we're trying to deal with the consequences.
And in fact, this is Press TV, which is Iranian TV, and they hear progressives, my fellow progressives, spouting this bullshit. And I'm sure they heard it, the progressives heard it from them, and back and forth, and they keep on amplifying it. And it's nonsense. It's nonsense. We didn't create ISIS.
العسكرية التي ألقتها القوات الأمريكية للأحزاب اليابانية والأمريكية.
Okay, I just showed that to you so I can explain to you what really happened, okay? Now, I'm not going to pretend like the CIA was doing all of this under Hillary Clinton's, establishment Democrats and Obama to help the Syrian people. But the fact is at the time, the Syrian people were being annihilated. Okay, in 2013, I heard that 250,000 Syrians had been killed by the beast Bashar. So, didn't bother me that we were dropping weapons to the Free Syrian Army. Problem is, the Free Syrian Army really weren't organized, and they didn't have very many troops. So they couldn't protect those and take them in. As a matter of fact, they ended up storing tons of ammo in warehouses around Aleppo somewhere. And yes, there was no IS, Islamic State, back then, but some really radical people broke in and took them all. So, what they could store. And the rest, yes, some guys picked them up when they came down, and used them. But it was really for a good cause, because the beast Bashar is just a murderous bastard. And, the Free Syrian Army ended up having to go to Turkey and hide out because they really couldn't protect themselves. And al-Nusra, while their ideology may be not that good, and while there may be some radicals in their ranks. They were the only people who stood up to the Beast Bashar, and they couldn't really do anything. They weren't strong enough, hence dropping weapons to them, right? But the Free Syrian Army became an umbrella organization for everybody fighting the Beast Bashar. And that included, people who were formerly Al-Qaeda, just one guy actually, and the newly forming IS, which was just people from who were fleeing the United States and Iraq, because we've done this stupid thing and given Iran control of Iraq. We have. Fortunately, the Shia in Iraq are so corrupt that even the Shia in Iraq are rising up against them. All this stuff you see going on in Iraq, it's as much Shia, if not more, than it is Sunni. But the Sunni definitely want their power back in Iraq. Iraq was a Sunni country. They weren't a majority, but it was a Sunni country. It was controlled by the Sunni, and a lot of Shia refugees came into the country for opportunity, and they became a majority, and now we're dealing with a majority Shia country, which has been, it's basically overrun with Iranians. And we've actually trained PMUs, they're called, Iranian terrorists, basically. And we've trained them and armed them, and now they're in Syria, fighting on the side of the Beast Bashar. So, none of this really works out. And we didn't create Daesh. Daesh is an ideology that has been around since Islam started. Sharia law and doing things by the word of Muhammad that they believe in, profusely. So, portraying it as us creating Daesh is bullshit. And if you want to go back to Al-Qaeda, yes, my father was in Saudi Arabia working with Osama bin Laden, raising the Mujahideen to go to Afghanistan to fight the Russians. And once they won and they became the government, we found out what, militant Islam is really like. Blowing up statues and just everything that you hear about, and all the cruel and unusual punishments, and women like cattle, all that. And we stopped supporting them a long time before they became Al-Qaeda. So we didn't even really create the Al-Qaeda that, of 9/11. That's bullshit. We created the Al-Qaeda that fought the Russians, and slowly but surely on their own they turned into Al-Qaeda. So none of this really represents reality. I'm not saying that we didn't make a lot of mistakes and do the wrong thing a lot of times. We should have created a what we have now, a government, and really provided them with the strength to keep religion out of it, and we didn't do that. We've never done that. So what I said here is the U.S. has not supported radical Islam ever. Even Osama bin Laden was not a proponent of radical Islam until years after we supported his U.S.-led insurgency against the USSR. We have always attempted to support more moderate elements. You have to accept that we're not going to wipe out 2 billion Muslims. This is an important point. Okay? To wipe out Daesh, you would have to kill all the billions of Muslims that are poor Muslims across all the way from the Philippines, to the Balkans. Although the Balkans has a more moderate group of people, in order to wipe out Daesh right now. The best way to wipe out Daesh is to promote to support Islam and to promote the more they advertise themselves as being peace-loving, and to my experience they always were. And we're just radicalizing them, and we're not radicalizing them by supporting them, we're radicalizing them by bombing them. So our only path to getting Muslims to go back to a religion of peace is to support the more moderate elements within the religion. While some see wisdom in the words of bin Laden, you have to ask which words, right? Because he wants the U.S. out of and others to mind their own business. That doesn't mean that Muslims like al-Nusra have any desire to rule the world or force Islam upon it, although some of them would. And when you don't support them, when you bomb them and give rise to such radicals as Islamic State, we can support elements like the Free Syrian Army, now the NS, the National Syrian Army, and the Free Syrian Army, and the government in exile, and Erdogan, and even al-Nusra, while fighting extremism like that coming out of Saudi Arabia and the various insurgencies like IS. And Americans who call all Sunni terrorists just don't get this. They're either, like crusaders, religionists, I call them, and they're just simple-minded. Kind of like most extremists, and aligning themselves with murderers and committers of genocide like the beast Bashar is a supreme break with their supposed peaceful views and values. So like Christians always like to talk about how they're so, but the fact is Christianity radicalizes Islam more than anything else. I mean, that's just a basic fact. So you've got demonstrations against the Assad government here, right near Turkey. They want to fight and take back their country, because this is their country. Out of all the countries, Sunnis are a vast majority of Syria, and whether they'll admit it or not in here, because they're under a gun, they've got a gun to their head with the beast Bashar. They want to see him go, and no, they don't like Islamic State either. That's just kind of like the devil, So now we've got all these joint patrols with Russia, and honestly I don't think Russia has any real intent of supporting Turkey, but we'll see, right? Because Russia's let the beast Bashar just rush in here, and the United States has backed off, and they're down here in the oil fields keeping him out still. So
Donald Trump, the first president elected without any prior experience as a human being. Now, this morning, Trump actually had some major news for us, that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, had been killed. And in classic Trump fashion, he was able to take something fundamentally positive and express it in the weirdest imaginable way. Because here is how he described the operation.
They did a lot of shooting. and they did a lot of blasting, even not going through the front door. You know, you think you go through the door. If you're a normal person, you say, knock, knock, may I come in? The fact is that they blasted their way into the house. They had a beautiful big hole and they ran in and they got everybody by surprise.
What are you doing? Did Trump only just learn how soldiers work? Listen, these guys are amazing. They got these chameleon suits and big shooties and blasties. They don't say knock knock. No, they don't do that like a normal person. They go through big, beautiful holes and they shout surprise. A lot of people are learning about this for the first time. This is new to a lot of people. But wait, because you haven't yet heard, Trump paid tribute to one crucial member of the team.
Our canine, as they call, I call it a dog. A beautiful dog. A talented dog.
That's right. I call them dogs, not like other people who call them furry lizards or barking cats or elephants but smaller and different. To me, they are and forever will be dogs. That's my term for them that I made up. And look, while Baghdadi being gone is clearly great news, I'd actually like to focus tonight on a different decision Trump recently made in the same region, and one that I would argue could have more long-term ramifications and which tells us much more about his decision-making as Commander-in-Chief. It's a move that alarmed many, even his cheerleaders on Fox and Friends.
The United States is going to start pulling troops from Turkey's border in Syria. That announcement last night.
Stunning. The White House says it's clearing the way for Turkish troops to invade. A disastrous series of events. I hope the president will rethink this.
Wow. You know things are bad for Trump when he's even lost the support of Fox and Friends, a show whose actual slogan is President Trump's dick is 17 inches long and thick as a tree trunk. That's the real slogan. Now, very basically, what happened here was Trump suddenly and against the counsel of nearly all his advisors pulled back troops along the Syria-Turkey border here who had been working with Kurdish-led forces to contain ISIS. And it wasn't just that.
Okay, he's ignorant. He's funny, but he's ignorant. Turkey had been warning the United States to get the fuck out of there, to get out of their way, that they were coming through. If they didn't want to help, if they didn't want to support them, then they needed to just get out of there. And they kept warning him and warning him and warning him. And finally they just said, hey, okay, Trump, we're coming. It's up to you. And Trump says all this stuff like, oh, if you kill one American troop, then I'll rain hell down upon you and stuff. That didn't help. That didn't help. What the Turks are doing here is good. They're trying to return the Syrian refugees to Syria, and that's not much room for that. And imagine if Erdogan manages to create an area in here and cram all the refugees into this part of Syria. Well, what if they decide to have an election? They already have a government in exile in Turkey. What if they decide to have an election and say, hey, look, the vast majority of and what happens if all the people in Bashar al-Assad's Syria decide, well, you know what, let's start sneaking over and joining in this zone, and then they're going to need more room, right? So Erdogan's going to have to do something. I mean, if you empty out all the people who don't like Assad, there'll only be like 5 million people in all of this part of Syria. And isn't that going to raise people's eyebrows? And then if they do end up in safe zones and they do vote for a president, I doubt that Bashar al-Assad would even run, right? He'd boycott the election like conservatives do in Venezuela. And all of a sudden, there would be a democratic government in this part of Syria, and maybe the U.S. would open up this part of Syria, that has their own government and doesn't support Bashar, and all of a sudden the illegitimacy and the totally militarized taking of Syria would be glaringly obvious, right?
Presence there also helped protect Kurdish civilians from Turkey, ISIS, and the Syrian government. And our troop withdrawal has had immediate...
Let me tell you something. The Kurds were more protected by the nature of the Sunni Muslims in this area, because this is vastly Sunni Syrian. Like I say, the Kurds would only get a little piece of Turkey. Like, they'd probably get this corner. You know, if we created a Kurdish state right now, it'd probably be this corner, part of Turkey, part of, not Mosul, that's vastly Sunni, part of Iraq, and part of Iran, wherever they are down here. It wouldn't be much of Syria. They're just not that much of a... They don't have a big enough population in Syria. They get a little piece of it. But, you know, John Oliver's showing his ignorance. The reason that the Kurds were able to do it wasn't because of American bombing and the tiny group of American troops in here. Although the Russians wouldn't want to attack the American troops. Could lead to World War III, right? But the good nature of the Sunnis in this area, they were willing to be subjugated by them. And by the way, tens of thousands of them are in prison camps. Most of them women and children. And, you know, what they call IS, a lot of them are just Syrians who stood up to the Kurds and the Beast Bashar and all that. So don't be fooled by a lot of the crap that he says. He's more about being funny than he is about being, you know, real. The truth really is what it comes down to. Yeah. Oliver lies a lot. It's just whatever suits him.
Turkish forces moved in almost as soon as we left, and over 100 civilians have been killed, with nearly 200,000 displaced.
Ooh, you mean 880,000 people that weren't supposed to be there? The Kurds brought in Kurds from all over the region to fill up those Sunni houses. Is that what you're talking about? And what did he say, 100 and... Man, that's nothing, considering Turkey has taken over these areas. They could have killed tens of thousands of people if they wanted to. If they were really out to get the Kurds. I'll tell you what, the Kurds that are from this area, I'm willing to bet that as long as they're not YPG or SDF, i.e. Militant Kurds from all over the region who come to fight there and live there. You know, they looked at it as an excellent opportunity to grab a whole bunch of land, a quarter of Syria at least. Then, and even those would be welcome if they would just put up their arms and say, look, I'm not a terrorist, I haven't ever bombed Turkey or anything like that, and I just want to, you know, peaceably, you know, do whatever I have to do. Maybe some of them would even be allowed to stay in Syria. But for sure the Kurds who lived in Syria, and much of them are refugees out here, they would be more than welcome. The only thing that might stop Erdogan from accepting them, allowing them to live in their own homes, would be the fact that they helped displace millions of Syrians, Sunni Syrians, and therefore Erdogan might say, well, look, you know, because you did that, because you created the problem, now you're going to have to make up for it by giving up your own home. And would he do that? I doubt it. But we just have to see, over time.
It has been a catastrophe. And this move has been nearly universally condemned. It's been criticised by everyone, from Bernie Sanders.
It hasn't been a catastrophe. It's been a good thing. I mean, I don't see any today, but literally hundreds of thousands of Sunnis, refugees, have already moved into these areas. And Turkey's going to build them tons of houses and infrastructure and do just like he did over here. Create schools and college and housing and everything for them. I mean, he's already spent $5 billion on just hosting the refugees. He can host them a lot cheaper in Syria. And plus, he's creating an army. All these guys who are fighting in Syria, they aren't just the people in Syria. They're the refugees, and he's been training them and arming them. He's been doing what nobody else in the region has been, including the United States. The United States has been a joke on this. They've literally been a joke from the beginning. The United States should be helping him. The Russians are helping him, and you're telling me the United States can't get behind him and help? If the Russians and the United States would get behind Erdogan, instead of demonizing him, all the shit you see about Erdogan is bullshit. This is the biggest democracy in the Middle East, not Israel. Israel's a theocracy, but this is a democracy. Even the Kurds. They even picked up a bunch of seats in parliament during the last election. So don't tell me that Turkey is this horrid, awful country full of horrid, awful Muslims who are just, they're going to start the next Ottoman Empire. They don't even want part of Syria. They have trouble managing their own country. They don't want to take on another country. So he's bullshit. He's very funny. I love him. I love to watch his comedy. And that's all this is comedy. It doesn't make any sense in reality.
And Elizabeth Warren to Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, the last of whom did not mince his words.
To abandon these people is a real shit show, and I'm hoping President Trump will reconsider. He's about to make...
Really, Oliver? We're listening to Lindsey Graham now? This guy's the stupidest motherfucker on the face of the earth. He's literally the American Taliban. He's Islamic State in America.
Make the biggest mistake of his presidency. I hope he adjusts.
A shit show. Although, to be fair, Lindsey Graham always looks like he's just said that exact phrase. I come into this Bojangles every Sunday, and I have never seen service like this. My chicken is damn. My biscuit is cold. My day is ruined. People, this is a real shit show right here. I will take my order to go. I am flustered. And when the consequences of a decision are that dire and the condemnation that widespread, it feels like it might be worth asking what exactly happened. Why did Trump decide to do it, and what might the ramifications be going forward? And let's start with what happened. Now, obviously, the situation in Syria...
Okay, Trump did not decide to do it. Trump, I explained to you earlier, Erdogan said, get the fuck out of the way, we're coming in, because he was tired of screwing around with Trump. And to be fair, it's not Trump, man. It's elements of our CIA and the Pentagon. Okay?
It's incredibly complex. You can be forgiven for not fully understanding it. What is much less forgivable is pretending to understand it when you clearly don't.
It's a very semi-complicated, not too complicated if you're smart, but it's a semi-complicated problem.
Oh, good. It's only semi-complicated, is it? I'd forgotten that Trump spent the 90s as the senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and not, as I clearly wrongly remembered, losing all his dad's money and trying unsuccessfully to bang Madonna. I forgot that, because clearly I'm not smart like him. There are more factions involved here than we have time to cover, but the important group to know about are the Kurds. There are about 30 million...
And yeah, you're right, Oliver. You clearly are not smart like him. Neither one of you are smart. You don't understand this, and you're playing expert. I'm telling you what's really going on, and I'm telling you, I'm giving you a realistic point of view. You know, I don't support the Sunnis. I don't support the Kurds. I don't support the United States or Russia. I certainly hate Assad because he's murdered over, like I say, it'll probably end up being 1 million people by the time we're done. And just look at him. He's like the devil. You know, he's got little pointy ears, and he's just, you know, he's a throwback from the Assyrian Empire, the creators of capitalism. The original Assyrian Empire, the first empire in the world in recorded history. And it was brutal, and it was very capitalistic and very rich. You know, the rich, not very rich, but actually very poor as far as the people go. But the rich stomped on the heads of the poor to get where they got and create their empire. And he's a throwback from that. I'm sure that he claims to be from the line of Assyrian kings, you know.
Million of them in the region, spread mostly across Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. They are the largest ethnic group in the world without a country of their own. So they're a minority wherever they live, putting them in a precarious situation. But it's important to know that they have been close military allies with America in the past, which is why it was so odd to hear Trump justify abandoning them like this.
Somebody wrote in a very, very powerful article today. They didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example. They mentioned names of different battles. They were there, but they're there to help us with their land, and that's a different thing.
Hold on, let me just get this straight.
But he's right? I mean, we went in there and we helped them take over a huge chunk of Syria, which is Sunni. You know, not very many Kurds out here. Al-Raqqa, or well, we just call it Raqqa. You know, these are all mostly Sunni cities, and even if there are a few majority Kurd cities, which I don't know that there are, there's tons of Syrian Sunni living in there.
You are mad because they didn't help the US fight in Normandy? Quick question, the fuck does that have to do with anything? There were also no Kurds at the Battle of Gettysburg, or helping us get to the moon, all suspiciously Kurdless missions. Where were the Kurds? Neil could have used their help holding his ladder. Oh, they were all busy, were they? All of them. The fact is, the Kurds have fought multiple times to help America, including in both the Gulf and Iraq wars. Meaning, by the way, the Kurds fought with the US military in at least 2 more wars than Donald Trump ever.
Okay, so let me see if I get this right. You're praising the Kurds for helping us in our illegal wars. Really? Oliver? John Oliver? Really? Is that what you're doing? Are you praising the Kurds for being our allies in illegal wars? I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's something you want to brag about. I don't think that's something the Kurds want to brag about. But it's true. It is absolutely true. But he's acting like it was like, oh, the Kurds are so good because they helped us in our illegal wars. I mean, do I really have to point these things out? Can you, are Americans so propagandized that they fall for this bullshit?
Ever fucking did. More recently, we turned to the Kurds in 2015 to help us contain ISIS in Syria.
And by the way, you know, you criticize Trump for avoiding military service. My heroes are guys that went to Canada and burned their draft cards during Vietnam. Okay? Now, Trump doesn't fall into that category. He falls into the category of rich people who are able to not go to wars because they're scumbags, right? And then they've got people in high places who will bend the rules for them. But, you know, you do have to say that they were doing the same thing. They were, you know, not participating. And I'll tell you what, if every American would not join the military, not join the police, not join the, you know, the religious organizations as priests and stuff, then this would be the greatest country in the world. The greatest country in the world. And Oliver, I don't know, does that just fly over your head there? I guess so.
We provided training and air support, and they were the frontline troops doing the close fighting, and it was a very tight partnership.
The U.S. military trusted their allies so completely.
Right. The United States backed the Kurds in taking over all of this part of Syria. Instead of having some balls and coming in and doing it themselves, you know, and on top of that, we've just been hounding the Sunni from, you know, we've been hounding the Sunni since 2003, killing them and pushing them into Syria. Where, by the way, Bashar al-Assad supported them when they first got pushed in, because he saw them as groups that he could control to fight in Iraq against the United States. He's no friend of the United States, and I assure you that when they made their big push into Iraq and took over all of this, and then it might have surprised them when they took most of Syria too, but you know, I have bona fide certified reports that Bashar al-Assad was like getting them released from jail. He was basically backing Islamic State before Islamic State became a problem in Syria. When the United States pushed them out of Iraq, and then they were just in Syria and they weren't serving his purposes, then he went after, he didn't go after them, the Iraqis here, he went after his own Sunnis and pushed them completely out of Syria, central Syria. They had land right down into Damascus. They were in suburbs of Damascus. And he fought a vicious war against them. That's why I say it's going to be at least 1 million people. And pushed them all up in here, and now they're all stuck up in here. Now, at the same time, the United States is attacking IS here. They push the U.S. and Iranians, American-trained Iranians. It boggles the mind, right? Pushes the Shia, the most backwards Sunni Iraqis, pushes them into Syria, and now they're stuck in here, and then he takes over this area with the Kurds and puts them all in prison camps, and the ones that aren't in prison camps end up escaping and end up in Idlib. And then we're going to scream and jump and shout that there's Islamic State and, you know, all kinds of radicals in Idlib, even though we forced them into Idlib. And the Turks are going to have to deal with them. They are dealing with them. But they don't deal with them the same way. They don't kill them and throw them in prison or anything. They try and isolate them and blend them in with the moderate rebels. So, you know, really what you've got is the United States and people like, I mean, he's just bouncing off of establishment Democrat talking points who want to just kill all of them. because establishment Democrats are best friends with the royal family in Saudi Arabia, and the royal family in Saudi Arabia hates these people. As a matter of fact, they both want to kill each other. So, you know, a lot of this is establishment Democrats. And then you've got even more radical, the PNAC crowd, right? Project for a New American Century, I think it is. And they just want to control. They want to get all these people to fight each other, and they want to control. You know, they've got their 7 countries, and they've done Iraq, and they've done Somalia, and all these other countries. And now they're wanting to do Syria and Lebanon. Oops, sorry. So let's watch a little bit more.
We're soon calling in American airstrikes.
It's true. The Kurds would point at something and we would blow it up. That's an incredible level of trust. If I had that power, to put it mildly, there would be no more Applebee's. They know what they did. They know what they did. Now, the Kurds' sacrifice in that fight was significant. While at least 6 Americans died fighting in that region, the Kurds suffered 11,000 casualties. And that alliance is one of the reasons why ISIS, which controlled this much territory in Syria in 2015, has since lost all of it. In fact, a key reason that we were able to take out al-Baghdadi was thanks to intelligence from the Kurds. So they fought bravely with us, and the situation in northeastern Syria was relatively stable. And then, in an instant, Trump threw that all away. So why? Why did he do that? Well, to hear him tell it, it's actually pretty...
And in fact, it wasn't the Kurds, because there's no Kurds in Idlib. There's moderate Sunni. And I guarantee you, they all knew that Baghdadi, and there's some more. There's more of them. And they gave them up. I can guarantee you that's what happened, that they gave them up.
Be simple.
I don't want to be in Syria forever. It's sand. And it's death.
Okay, first, since when does Trump avoid areas of sand and death? He owns a golf club in Florida where the average age is opposed to the Civil Rights Act. The guy loves sand and death. But that is part of his reductive argument that America should not be stuck in endless wars and that the troops should come home, which is at least a real, coherent foreign policy position. The problem is, the troops aren't actually coming home. Since May, we've actually increased the number of them deployed to the Middle East by 14,000. And
well, not just the Middle East, but I've seen on this map, it only shows 24 hours, but I've seen on this map, a matter of fact, well, here's U.S. patrol returns, and I know that we've deployed more to Syria just since we supposedly pulled out. So do you see, you know, when you get guys like Trump and the Republicans and the establishment Democrats, that's when things get crazy. That's when things get crazy. And things are crazy now. I mean, everybody's just dancing around each other. Erdogan's trying to do something for real. And he's the only one. Everybody else... Well, I mean, you could say that the Russians and the beast Bashar are trying to do something real, but their real is in like the 7th level of hell. You know, they're trying to kill everybody. And they're running them all out. How can he get away with running 20 million people, or maybe 18, either into small parts of his country, and it's not his country, I shouldn't even say that, and into Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, and Syria, and Iran, or Iraq, yeah, it's Iran now. How can he get away with that? How does the world sit back and let him do that? You know, it's crazy. It's crazy. And then they want to jump up and down all over the place when Erdogan decides to try and, move things back, move the refugees back into Syria. Obviously, he's not going to force them into Syria into the beast Bashar's hands, but he's trying to force them back into Syria into a safe zone, as he said.
Just days after his Syria decision, Trump made a big announcement.
We are sending troops and other things to the Middle East to help Saudi Arabia. But are you ready? Saudi Arabia, at my request, has agreed to pay us for everything we're doing. That's the first.
Okay, so one, this probably won't surprise you, they have not agreed to that. And two, even if they had, that would be a weird thing to brag about. The US military doesn't charge for protection because it isn't a mercenary force. It's the reason the Eagle on the US SEAL carries...
Oh yeah, really? I mean, you don't think that we were a mercenary army along with the rest of the countries that went in to invade Iraq at Saudi Arabia and Kuwait's? Yeah, we were. That's all we are. We're just a mercenary army. Whenever we leave our own borders, we're a mercenary army.
Arrows and an olive branch, not arrows and a credit card reader. But the idea that we'll send troops to a country that pays us is definitely in keeping with Trump's short-term, purely transactional worldview. It's the same philosophy that's led him to suggest withdrawing troops from South Korea because he thinks they're not paying us enough, or to threaten to pull out of NATO because he thinks other countries aren't contributing their fair share. So look, I'm sorry, Kurds, unless you can give Donald Trump something he wants, like, I don't know, Hunter Biden's email password or Melania Trump's phone number, you can apparently expect fuck all from him. So if this wasn't done out of some grand principle, why did it happen, and happen so suddenly? Well, it seems Trump's decision followed a phone call with President Erdogan of Turkey. And a little context here. For years, Turkey has struggled with a Kurdish militant group called the PKK, who are unquestionably extreme. The State Department considers them a terrorist group. And
they've killed more Turks than any other by far. Like 20, 30, 40,000. I'm not quite sure exactly how many. But there's no other terrorist group in the world that's that successful. Unless you maybe counted, the North Vietnamese fighting for their country. But these are people in other people's countries killing through terrorist attacks. That many people. You imagine if Osama bin Laden killed 20 or 30,000 Americans so far and was still alive running around? What would Americans think of that?
And Erdogan firmly believes that a Kurdish group we've been working with are basically the same as the PKK. And he wants them either dead or nowhere.
And yes, they are. Because a lot of them, going all the way into Iraq, have actually carried out terrorist attacks in Turkey against the civilian population. They don't screw with the Turkish military. They can't. One of my best friends from 10th grade is a Turkish intelligence. He's in Turkey's intelligence, and every Turk is required to do like 2 years in the army. To me, that's like being thrown in jail for 2 years. But anyway, they are. And I know what he's like, So, I mean, these are the real deal when it comes to terrorists. They're even way beyond any of the terrorist groups that we think of as terrorist groups. These, and we do consider them terrorists.
Near the Turkish border. But this isn't actually a new problem. We've been basically managing to balance our interest in containing ISIS with our need to manage Erdogan's concerns for years now. It has been difficult, but we've basically done it, until it seems Erdogan got on the phone with Trump earlier this month and told him he wanted to move against Kurdish forces in Syria, and Trump essentially said, fine, we'll run away then.
Bullshit. You see, you're an idiot. You don't know anything about what's going on. He warned Trump repeatedly and more aggressively until he finally just sent the troops in, and the American troops had to run away, and Trump got all upset and you better not hurt any American troops, and that's what happened.
And that is a decision that has baffled many, including Mitt Romney.
Erdogan basically said, we're coming in, get out of the way, and America blinked.
See, he got it right. If he can get it right, if a idiot Mormon from Utah or wherever or from Massachusetts, I guess, can get it right, then, So, but it shows that some people know what's really going on in some instances, right?
Am I reading that wrong?
No, Mitt, you're actually not. Much like the rest of America discovering this week that your secret Twitter account was named Pierre Delecto. That's real. You are very much not reading that wrong. Incidentally, Pierre Delecto sounds like a name that would have come up in Pulp Fiction if that conversation about French McDonald's had kept going. In France, they call the quarter pounder a Royale with cheese, and they call Grimace Pierre Delecto. But it is truly troubling the sheer extent to which Trump has just rolled over for Erdogan. He called the Kurds, who, remember, have repeatedly fought and died alongside the US military.
And he didn't, right? Does anybody remember him announcing sanctions against Turkey? I mean, that is unprecedented, to level sanctions against a NATO member. And threatening to rain fire down upon Turkey if they killed one American troop accidentally. I mean, this is a military operation. People are going to die. Americans either get the fuck out of the way, get out of that, beyond that 30-kilometer or mile zone, or they're going to get killed. And I got to tell you, man, I see the United States. Okay, not today. They just show them over here, but they're in here. They're in here. Are they fucking nuts? There's Americans running around in here, American troops, and they got stuck in between Free Syrian Army or Syrian National Army, which is Turkish-trained Syrian Sunni, and here, and they had to turn around and go back. I mean, this is insane, okay? There shouldn't be an American any closer than about here. And I don't know exactly where this zone's going to be. And it's probably not going to be according to the line that they drew. It's probably going to be where they managed to do it militarily. But I know it's supposed to go all the way over to here. And the Kurds in here, and the Kurds in Manbij, they're going to be the last to go. And that's when you're going to see a shit show. Okay? Because if they refuse to leave, and they might refuse to leave in this area where their strongholds are, or wherever their strongholds are, historical strongholds. But you know what? I don't see Syrian Kurds fighting with Turks. They'll either get out of the way or they'll make peace. And that's a good thing, right? I wonder what these things are. I haven't seen these before. Oh, they're Turkish bases. Okay.
No angels. And while at one point Trump did apparently try to prevent a Kurdish slaughter, Erdogan seemed to feel pretty comfortable ignoring him.
Yesterday, a letter surfaced from President Trump to Erdogan. He warned against a Turkish military offensive and said, in decidedly undiplomatic language, "Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool." Erdogan reportedly threw away the letter and launched the assault into Syria the same day.
Holy shit! He didn't just ignore him. Erdogan threw away a piece of mail that day. That alone is ice cold. He probably also throws away birthday cards directly after reading them, like a monster, instead of keeping them on the kitchen counter for a week out of a sense of irrational guilt and then throwing them out, because what else are you going to do? Frame it? Of course not. It's a piece of trash, but not for a week. But even if you think Trump was right to withdraw troops from the area, it clearly makes sense to do it in a way that will cause the least damage to the region, your allies, and your own interests. But Trump did none of that. Our withdrawal was so rushed, we had to leave a lot behind. Just watch this.
Yeah, no shit, because he waited till the last minute when there's actually bullets flying to do it. And so they were running from actual, war going on. And on both sides. And, both sides, they have the same kind of camouflage and everything. American troops could very easily be mistaken by either side.
It's a Russian reporter wandering around a US base just hours after the troops had left.
They left here yesterday at 4 a.m. Look here. I am currently at the U.S. kitchen. American soldiers used to eat here. The fridge is full.
Yum.
Coca-Cola.
Not only did we dump our allies without warning, we left a refrigerator full of free Coke for whoever took our place, although...
But Americans, generally speaking, even leave their weapons behind because it's too expensive. I mean, other than what you carry with you, but the excess, it's too expensive to take with you. It's too easy to replenish from a new supply where you're going. So generally speaking, Americans leave weapons all over the place.
Maybe the most interesting part of that video was watching the reporter blatantly ignore the fridge full of Pepsi right next to it. Because even to Russian reporters, the answer to, is Pepsi okay, is a resounding, yep. So basically, America left the region the same way you leave a party right after you clogged the toilet. Quickly leaving everything behind and forcing someone else to deal with all the shit. And the consequences to this have been dire. For starters, Kurdish-led forces were in charge of guarding many ISIS prisoners, and by leaving so abruptly, we forced them to abandon their posts to fight for their lives. And the thing that any 6-year-old could tell you would happen next, happened next.
The White House has tried to downplay how many of the 10,000 ISIS prisoners in Syria may have escaped.
There were a few that got out, a small number, relatively speaking, and they've been largely recaptured.
But that's not what the president's special envoy for Syria, James Jeffrey, said on Wednesday.
We would say that the number is now over 100. We do not know where they are.
It's true. Over 100 ISIS prisoners escaped, and we don't know where they are. Or at least, they don't know where they are, because I have a surprise for everyone here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, the ISIS prisoners! Oh, fuck! Oh, fuck! Oh, fuck, where are they? Oh, fuck! Oh, shit! Oh, fucking fuck! Oh, fuck! They were supposed to be... Oh, fuck! Why did we give them shovels? Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, as I was saying, over 100...
Okay, I think I've missed the part that I wanted to point out, but basically, dipshit John Oliver calls Erdogan a dictator and calls Turkey a dictatorship. And nothing could be farther from the truth, okay? Nothing. It's totally bullshit. Turkey's full of anti-Muslim Muslims. I mean, my best friend, he's a secularist. I don't even know if he is really a Muslim, even though he comes from a Muslim family and his father was Muslim. But they hate Muslims who want to make the country a Muslim country. They'll fight to the death over this. But they're no longer in power because Turkey's a democracy. And through democracy, Muslims have more or less taken over the government, the foreign policy, and everything. Now, that being said, they're really moderate Muslims. I mean, do you ever see Erdogan wearing a turban or, Muslim dress? No, he wears a suit all the time. And everybody in Turkey, well, no. There's plenty of Muslims who, are real serious Muslims in Turkey, but they don't get a lot of press, because it's not popular to be like a Salafist or a Wahhabist in Turkey. As a matter of fact, those groups are at odds. Turks and Wahhabists and Salafists, even the Erdogan type Muslims, they don't get along. And Turkey and obviously, if you've been following this at all, you know that Erdogan doesn't get along with the royal family in Saudi Arabia. There's just too much going on, you know.
ISIS prisoners have escaped, and we have no idea where they are. And the thing is, it gets even worse.
But wait a minute. They let them go. You know, I don't know what's wrong with John Oliver. Doesn't he want to be funny about the truth? Because, you know, at some point, lies aren't funny, you know, or ignorance. So I'm going to leave John Oliver because I didn't get to see the part where he calls Erdogan dictator and Turkey a dictatorship. So we're just going to move on.
5 days after the presidential election, life here hasn't returned to normal. Bolivia's capital city of La Paz woke up to dozens of roadblocks, staged by anti-government protesters. They're demanding a rerun of the elections.
Our will has not been respected, and I think there was fraud. We're fighting for our democracy. We want to show our neighbors that we must protect our rights.
President Evo Morales
Now, to be clear, she's one of the white minority right-wingers, just like Venezuela has Guido and these people. These are their American-backed coup people.
declared himself winner of the national elections after the official count gave him just enough votes to avoid a runoff against his main political rival, Carlos Mesa. But Mesa has refused to recognize the result, claiming there were serious irregularities. Large protests have followed.
And by the way, there's all kinds of organizations in there watching this, so it's not like he could, even if he wanted to, cheat.
Now Morales' opponents have called for a general strike.
We have to put pressure on this government, and I think we must force Morales to resign. If the election is held again, Morales will still control the electoral tribunal.
But in some pockets of the city, people are ignoring the call for strike action, and business carries on as usual. In this neighborhood, indigenous merchants believe that Morales' re-election was fair. They're happy to see him continue in power for another 5 years.
The economy has grown with Evo Morales, and the quality of life of humble people like us has improved. Our situation was very difficult with previous governments.
He has improved many things. He built a cable car for our city and also provided subsidies to pregnant women. We didn't have that before.
As the day ends, some people are simply going back home, but many are manning roadblocks like this one, and say that later tonight they will go to a large protest in front of the country's electoral tribunal. Bolivia has emerged largely divided from this election, and some observers say that only a rerun will calm tensions down. Manuel Rueda, TRT World, La Paz, Bolivia.
I don't know about you, but that looked pretty sparse. And they really are funded by the United States, and there's different groups that get funded by Congress, and they support terrorists like Guido. You know, he's a narco-terrorist. And I'm sure they found these people in Bolivia and funneled lots of money to them, and let's hope that their president, Evo Morales, is able to keep them under control, because what's going on there is the same kind of bullshit that's happened in Venezuela. Wonder where that one is. Europe in decline. Maybe that's the one I talked about earlier.
I think most people can take a look out at the slate of candidates we have in this Democratic primary and think, yeah, that's probably enough. That's a lot of people on the stage at once. But that field might actually still get bigger. There are rumblings about a few different people, and I don't want to necessarily put it out in the universe, but one of them, Hillary Clinton, isn't necessarily not getting into this. Now, this all started...
And Michelle Obama. I mean, this would be last ditch, right? To throw these people at us. And I don't know about you, but I find it... Why does this thing keep moving around? What I said here. Just to be clear, if Hillary were to get into the race now, or Michelle Obama, it would make it clear that anything she says would simply work against her, which is why she would wait until very close to the primaries, which are, what, 2 months, in January sometime? Because anything she says will just hurt her. You know, like Biden, my time, Joe. That's what I call him, Biden, my time, Joe. Every time he opens his mouth, his ratings go down. On top of that, it would be like a kid who comes in after exams and wants an A in the class. I mean, that's what she'd basically be doing. She skips all the hard parts and thinks everyone is going to just give her a pass. So, she's nonsense.
In a hearing before the House Financial Services Committee, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg was grilled by lawmakers, and this was so satisfying to watch because for those of you who haven't been paying attention...
I didn't really have anything to say about this because I just think he's a dipshit and a opportunist. I think he got Facebook by stealing everything from everybody else who worked hard to create it, and that he's portrayed himself as some kind of hacker elite, and he's a joke. He's a joke. All he is you know, good at taking everybody's money, stockholders and everything, and that's about it. He's an idiot.
You think it's too hard to meditate? I can't meditate. When I try and meditate, I just sit there thinking. Well, I'm going to show you how to meditate right now. The solution is but a minute away.
Okay, well, you know, I like to listen to Russ. He's alright sometimes. But Russ, with all his money and connections of people wanting to flock to the most accessible person with an audience, doesn't know shit about meditation. Okay, anyone can come up with a concentration exercise. It can be anything. You can think about a goat you saw once and simply concentrate on it till you completely disconnect with the world. But with medication, yeah, maybe so. With meditation, really, what it really does is it oxygenates the body, and you get that oxygen rush. And that's the kind of euphoria, otherworldliness feeling. It's just a feeling. It oxygenates the body in various ways, inducing euphoria and health. Because if you oxygenate your body, and you can concentrate on oxygenating like certain areas. I can actually like make the top of my thigh pulse like a heartbeat. And And of course it will release various chemicals manufactured in your brain, just like sex. And when you get rid of all the mumbo jumbo, because that's all that Russ is going to talk about here. He's going to talk about, entering different states of mind where you're somehow connected with the immaterial world and spiritualism and all that bullshit, man. It's all bullshit. And when you get rid of all that and you get down to the nitty-gritty of how to achieve this and control it, then you understand meditation. Now, I will tell you, because what he talks about for the next 10 minutes is just utter nonsense, but I can tell you how to meditate, and I can tell you about a form of meditation that I've developed off of learning Zen meditation from a Salesian brother at my Salesian school in Beirut, who went to India and learned from them and then came back and taught us. And I'll explain to you how. Okay, so if you followed this at all, you know that I was put in jail for something I didn't do. So obviously I felt like it was going to be a very stressful situation. I went into it not really knowing how bad it was going to be, and it wasn't bad at all. I got into it with some of the guards a few times, but it was totally one-sided, just them being shitheads to me, and that's what they do, right? So I just avoided them the whole time I was in there. The people in there were great. I mean, they're the best people I've ever met, although I don't want to get involved with them on the outside because they're at odds with the police and and into all kinds of illegal things. And the last thing I want to do is get drawn into a situation where these conservative assholes in Kentucky can use it against me. So I don't fraternize with them very much. I would, and I may, but it'll only be, I'll keep all the illegal activity at arm's length because they're great people. All they are is people who are bucking the system in the purest way, in the way that you and I and typical average Americans are not willing to do. They're people who have nothing to lose. So let me explain to you about, I go to jail and I'm being held in like where you go and you're pushed, you're put into the jail, and there's a big long process. And so I decided I would just meditate all the way through it. And I've developed a way of meditation where you can do it and nobody even knows you're doing it. I mean, I'm standing there talking to the people, and they're doing all their stupid shit, making you bend over and all that kind of crap and take off your clothes and all this stupid shit. And I know maybe they have reasons for doing it and stuff, but it's absolutely humiliating. And so I meditated all the way through it. And I meditated while walking around and doing stuff, and completely unbeknownst to any of the people at the jail. And I'll explain that, how you do that. But first I'm going to explain to you meditation as it was explained to me, okay? So you're supposed to sit straight up, in a sitting position. You don't have to double cross your legs or any stupid crap like that, but a lot of them do that. But you're supposed to keep your back straight, your spine straight, because you're going to move energy from the top of your head down your spine to the bottom of your spine. And you do this by chanting 4 simple words. One is Ung, like U-N-G, or Ong, like O-N-G. And you start with your top of your head, or your head, and you take a huge deep breath, and you do it all in one breath, and you say Ong, Ong, U-N-G in your throat, Gring, G-R-I-N-G in your chest, kring, C-R-I-N-G, in your stomach. And then you say Chamadai Vijaya, which is just some religious chant to the god or goddess Vijaya, you know, god of fertility. Now, I still do that, or sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just go, and sometimes I go all the way down from the top to the bottom. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just go, and hold your breath. Okay, so anyway, so that's the way you do it by the book, right? There's a book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. My teacher gave it to us to read if you want to learn all about it. Again, a lot of it is just mumbo jumbo. But what you're doing is you're taking a deep breath, and then you're letting it out really slowly, and your lungs are under pressure. You're going slowly, slowly letting it out. And you're going from extreme oxygenization, you know, the pressure is forcing oxygen into your body, and to total lack of oxygen when you're done. You're totally out of breath, right? Every bit of oxygen or air has left your lungs. And I discovered that's what it was doing. I mean, that's what it's doing to you physically. It's oxygenating, and then that total lack of oxygen, and it gives you that euphoria, gives you that sense of disconnect that is called transcendental meditation. And then I developed that into where just walking around, you can just take a deep breath. Nobody even has to see you do it. And you just start going, but under your breath, so nobody can hear you. And you're going, you can hear it, but they can't. And you're doing, and you're letting it out so slowly, and you're blocking the air at your throat, at the top of your esophagus, you know, down near your, under your throat, right there. You're going, I don't know if you can hear that, but I can do it so quietly that I could be standing there talking to you, or listening, or watching, or whatever. Like, it would appear that I'm just simply participating in reality, and doing it the whole time. And I did. And it did give me a real mellow, kind of laid back kind of attitude, which definitely helped me with dealing with all these stupid cops, right? Because that's all they are. Cops are morons from the top to the bottom. Whether they're the highest educated in the state or whatever, they're just a bunch of dipshits. You know, they're trained to be stupid. They're ignorant of the real law. They're ignorant of any kind of morals or you know, having any kind of conscience or anything like that. So when I was dealing with them, all the way into the jail, I was doing that. The guy I got transferred through with, one of them, actually there were two of them, and one of them was utterly insane. He should have been in an insane asylum, and they put him in solitary. They took him away from us at some point, about halfway through being processed. That's what I mean, processed. And put him in solitary. The other guy was in there for... He had bought a car on Craigslist, and it turned out to be stolen. And then they threw him in jail, and while he was in jail, he developed a drug dependency. Several drugs, but one or two in particular. And so he got in trouble in jail for drugs. And so they put all kinds of more sentences upon him, and then he opted for drug court, because now he was a drug addict. So he opts for drug court. I forget what his name is, but what a totally sweet and kind guy. And he kind of felt like he didn't really like me because he knew you don't like people in jail, right? But he certainly decided he was going to try and help me because I was just some, typical average Lexington living in a, a subdivision who'd gotten railroaded into prison, right, into jail, the Fayette County Detention Center. And I had tons of people who'd spent time in state prisons and stuff with me who told me that that was the worst jail they'd ever been in. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, so I get in, right, and now I'm not having to deal with guards and stuff all the time, just 12 guys in my own. And we're in the pre-jail. It's like everybody gets thrown in this one part of the jail. Like there's 8 or 10 parts of the jail, and there's 12 pods in each one. And I'm scared to death of all these people, right? And they're all kind of crazy, but really they were a lot of fun. And except for somebody stealing some of my stuff, like my toothpaste and stuff like that, everybody really looked out for me. And this guy decided he was going to look out for me, and he told me what happened to him. So he's in drug court now, and it's like he's never going to get out of jail. Or he's going to either be in this, one of the many drug rehabs around Lexington, Kentucky, which is where I'm talking about, or in jail. Because when he's in the drug rehab, he has to complete, I don't know how many months or years, but he keeps on getting caught with drugs and put in jail for a while, and then he has to go back into rehab. And it's like he's never going to get out. And then once he gets out, he's got a record, to the system, it's a pretty bad record. Being in possession of stolen property, and then drugs this, drugs that. And, really, that system made him the criminal that he became. Now, I met a lot of crazy people when I was in there, and some of them could get maybe a little pushy and stuff like that, but what do you expect, right? Because everybody in there, first thing they do is talk about how they're such badasses and how they beat the shit out of people in prison and all that kind of stuff, which probably most of it was nonsense, and it was all for show. So it really wasn't bad. I mean, I went through 2 months and 10 days because I got 20 days off, 10 days a month for good behavior, because I managed not to get into a fight with anybody. And there was only one fight in my cell in the whole time that I was there, and it wasn't really a fight. They made the mistake of sticking a real mental case in our cell. And I mean, this guy, first night he's in there, he comes over next to my bunk, because I just spent most of my time in my bunk, either sleeping or reading a book or something. And tells me that University of Kentucky was put on this earth for him to steal bicycles, and that he's stolen over 2,000 bicycles. And it's kind of funny because I heard about him getting run over. He was run over while riding probably a stolen bike, and it broke his back in 2 or 3 places, and he was all twisted, and he was gaunt, and he had, I grew a beard because I didn't want to use the razors while I was in there. There was hepatitis B mostly going around, which is really just caused by people suffering withdrawal from heroin. Lots of people in there for heroin. One of the best guys I met in there, he got caught, and he ate a big ball of heroin. And I swear to God, man, he was fucked up when he came. Even after they dried him out for 3 days, he was fucked up for at least 2 days. He was wasted. And I got to know him pretty well at that time, but he was wasted. So anyway, they stick that guy in there, and sooner or later, he throws a fit because the guys are cleaning the cell with, they're mopping, and they move his box. We all get a box, right, to keep under the bed, and they moved it so that they could mop underneath the bed. Well, this guy wouldn't shut up. This guy goes on for 10 or 20 minutes railing on this one guy who's like a really quiet kind of guy, except for he can be really irritating. You know, he likes to talk shit all the time. But anyway, so this guy was just totally trying to, you know, calm him down, say, okay, I'll never touch your box again. And this guy's mental. He's just going on and on and on. And finally, this one black guy who we all loved, Tyrone, I think his name was, a pretty big guy, but not as big as me. I was one of the biggest people in there. But I played the old man routine. The old man, frail, and and you know, everybody felt sorry for me and everything. And he just went over there and told him to shut the fuck up. And when the guy wouldn't shut up, he just popped him one time in the mouth. And then the cops come running in, and he throws up his hands, and they take him off. But the cool thing was, is even though he popped that guy, he was getting out the next day, and he still got out the next day. So it didn't affect him getting out. So I felt good about that. Anyway, I was talking about the meditation, and yeah, you know, it can be really useful. But don't listen to this guy. I mean, Russ, when I start thinking about everything he's had to say, when he first started, he had the Trues, which is True News, and that was interesting. And he would run around and participate in movements like housing movements, because the London was moving people out there, gentrifying, all that kind of stuff. And it was interesting. But now all he talks about is basically what I took in college, which is, you know, a non-material world that is exactly backing our material world, and you can access it through your mind and control the material world. Well, that's not happening. I've tried it. You know, I can't make you believe me simply by accessing the material world and changing it. And if there is any truth to that, it doesn't quite work that way. It certainly doesn't happen immediately. There may be ways of, if there is an immaterial world at all, which I don't know, and I'm not trying to say there is, but manipulating it is definitely an acquired skill. And I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist, because I've experienced a lot of stuff. I feel like I can make things happen, like get George Bush out of office and stuff. I did that by completely ignoring the guy. But then he didn't go after 4 years, he went after 8 years. But eventually he did go, and in disgrace, and everything that I wanted out of that. But I'm not saying that's like a magic trick, okay? But it's interesting to think about, because you never know, it's a possibility.
Theo nhiều nguồn tin tôi được biết thì cũng trong cái đợt này thì hình như có rất là nhiều, hơn 100 người đang lên đường để đi tìm cái sự sống của mình. Nhưng
Okay, so the Vietnamese, you know about them being found, like 50 of them in a truck, all dead. And I'm just going to say this points out again that we have an overpopulation problem, but it isn't simply about too many people. It's about the utter failure of the capitalist system. Capitalism doesn't coordinate to make supply equal demand. It coordinates to make sure demand is much higher than supply, to make sure sellers are able to sell all that they decide to sell. See, they're deciding how much to make and how much to sell. And it's not necessarily, as a matter of fact, I say it's not optimal. You know, we all hear this over and over again, that capitalism, you know, leads to productivity, leads to a plethora of goods and services, and we all get to swim around in it. Well, we know that isn't true. And it even throws away what they don't sell, while others around the world die in horrific ways, like suffocating in the back of a truck. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear like a certain percentage, like 33% or something, of everything, all the food we produce, just ends up in the garbage. You know, why don't we have a system where every day they come around and pick up our food that's going bad, and food that is bad already? Take our food, turn it into compost, you know, or you know, fertilizer. It just ends up in a creek somewhere. I don't know what they're doing with it. And you know, I've got all these ways that I'm able to do everything. Everything. I'm repurposing or doing it myself, right? The what do you call it? Well, whatever. You know what I'm talking about, right? Why can't I think of that word? Okay, well, I can't. But anyway, so it's the throwaway culture, you know, the consumer culture. And it's like America feels like it would die if it didn't allow everybody who wants to just live that life. I'm doing just fine. You know, I wash all my trash and package it up for recycling. That's what I was saying, was for recycling. I recycle everything and haven't thrown away anything forever. But you know, these things where people are, I mean, really, people are traveling all the way from Vietnam to England in the hopes of a better life, and they're ending up dead in the back of a truck, or being rounded up and sent back, or whatever. I mean, England is bursting at the belt. It's you know, the English people there are tired of sharing everything that they've got with all these, you know, foreign countries, sending them their refuse. I mean, I hate to say that, and I do want to do something about it. I do want to fix this world to where they don't have to go all the way to England, and all of this is bullshit. Oh.
Is footage from the first episode of The Watchmen, which premiered just last week on HBO, which I watched. And ever since I watched it, you're seeing the massacre of African Americans in Tulsa in 1921. I've been worried since I watched that, how many people are actually going to know that that was not something that they just made up for the show, but an actual historical event, one of the darkest individual things that has ever happened in America.
Okay, so I already talked about this, but I just wanted to show you the beginning of that. And by the way, I think The Watchmen was a really good comic book that I collected. Probably still have it. So, and it's a sci-fi thriller kind of thing. It's not really about, they're probably just setting up you know, the scenes so that their superheroes can come out later. Maybe one of them was black. Anyway, they have a bunch of weird superheroes with really strange powers.
With me in the studio is Joel Howard-Taylor, Vice President of Liberia. She's here in Benin for the World Health Summit. Madam Howard-Taylor, many thanks for your time.
This shocked me. I was like, Joel Howard-Taylor is Vice President? So Liberia, I don't know if you know it, but it's a colony of blacks from America who decided they would be treated better if they could form their own country in Africa, Liberia. And then once they got there, they were like Americans. I mean, they did everything bad the way Americans, white Americans, it's like they learned it all from us. And of course, white Americans, racists, backed Liberia, and they helped us in World War II and all this, but they're a blight upon their country. Okay? They forced the indigenous people out of a certain part of Liberia, out into the, you know, they were always indigenous, like living in the forests and stuff, just like in the rainforests in Brazil and stuff like that, where they're being persecuted too. And then they fought wars with them and killed lots of them. But she is the wife of this guy. And he's on the run. He's in Nigeria or somewhere. This guy is the scum of the earth. And I just think everybody should learn about all these things that are going on, especially horror stories like this. I mean, this guy, in order to funnel diamonds out of Sierra Leone, he created a civil war. He's he's a neighbor in Liberia, and he's the guy you hear about all the time, who captures all these kids and then teaches them to murder even members of their own family and hack off limbs and even eat other human beings. Cannibalism. So I think every American should learn about Liberia and countries like it, where the United States has a special relationship with these people. The small boys unit. God. Now, what amazes me is that his wife, I mean, can they not get rid of these people? So this fat ass woman is now vice president, and let's watch what they... I mean, look how fucking smug she is. She's got to be just as bad as her husband. And she's going to sit here and talk about how she's so great. But the country just needs more time. Because that's what conservative rich people always say, right? You just need to give us more time to make things, to build the country. No. It's not like that. You're the ones who are, making things go so slow and gobbling up all the money that could be used to improve people's lives.
We just saw a report of how DRC is struggling to tackle Ebola. Liberia has been successful in dealing with the disease. How are you working together with affected countries to tackle this epidemic?
As a result of the Ebola epidemic...
She's got to be 300 pounds. She could probably feed all of Liberia just by stopping eating and losing some weight.
In Liberia, a civilian...
And don't get me wrong, man, I don't have anything against fat people. I understand, how hard it can be to lose weight, and spent a lot of time fighting with it. But you know, to be the head of a country and the head of supposedly in charge of feeding the country and be that bad. I mean, there's something wrong there. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something seriously wrong.
A reporting system was put in place. It's a regional one across West Africa. There is a whole team of medical personnel that have been trained to deal with it. I'm not sure if we've gotten any requests from the DRC, but I think the information that was provided during our processes are free to the members of the African Union on how we tackled Ebola and how we were able to defeat it amongst the 3 countries that were heavily affected. So there's an issue of early detection, surveillance, getting them to the clinics that are necessary, and dealing with the disease so it doesn't spread beyond where it is. Containment is critical.
Exactly. Now, you're calling for world leaders and politicians to prioritize implementation of universal health coverage. But many in your own country complain about the lack of health equipment, lack of drugs, high maternal mortality. So how serious is your government about health coverage?
So she's one of these politicians who talks about how great they are and how they're helping everybody, while in reality there's a massive catastrophe going on, especially amongst the indigenous community, which probably would rather be left alone because this is what they have, you know.
And I think all of us as national governments that have signed on to the Sustainable Development.
And in fact, all of the indigenous people all over the world, they all came up with solutions, and they live in until they run into these people and us, they live in paradise. You know, more or less. I mean, sure, there's empires that have sprouted up and warlike peoples, but generally speaking, when left on their own in the forest, they developed a sustainable community. That it doesn't really lend itself to poverty, you know, because everybody's kind of got to, you know, eat the same pig that they catch, or, you know, watch Apocalypto. As much as I dislike, you know, the guy from Mad Max, you know, the Australian guy, American basically, he did a great movie about the indigenous people in South America, and you can see how they lived when they were on their own, how brilliant they were, and how well they fit in with the forest. But then you get somebody like this come from America, all these people, or most of them, Taylor, you know, last names like Taylor and Washington, and they bring in American culture. They somehow just love, you know, McDonald's, and they ruin the whole country to the point where they have armies that are cannibals, hacking off limbs and killing their members of their own family.
Which says, leave no one behind.
And I suggest you watch Blood Diamond too, because I think it's a lot to do with this story.
Must continue to work towards this. If you look across the African spectrum, and maybe across West Africa, I don't think you'll find any country that has universal health coverage. What we're doing at this point is looking at all of the options that are available so we can begin initially.
Actually, a number of them do.
With children under 5 and pregnant women. I think that proposal is being worked on by the Ministry of Health, and we're hoping we can get it online as soon as possible, taking into consideration all of the other issues that we have. But universal health coverage is not just providing an option for someone to go into a facility. Like you say, it's making sure that those facilities are up to par, that the laboratories are actually working so that when you do your testing, people will know that you have a particular disease and not the other one.
Really? Do you feel like you have to explain to us what universal health care is? I think even an idiot knows it's getting your help for your health problems.
So we're working on those issues. We have a few new health facilities that are being upgraded. We're building some new ones. The president has initiated a process where we're looking at a hospital for the military, particularly for those in the Secret Service and security and military installation.
Oh, good. So we're going to take really good care of the people the thugs who keep the people down.
So that they too have access. So we're doing the best we can. It's a very costly thing, as you know, but we just have to start one installation at a time.
Yeah. I guess the challenge is for Liberians to understand this, because there's been recent protests for health officials were involved, complaining about the state of health facilities and all. Your government came to power promising to fight poverty and, of course, corruption. But many Liberians say they don't see any improvements since President Ria came into power. What do you say?
I say that governance and growth and development is a process. It's not an event. And our government is trying. We've put in place a pro-poor agenda.
Yeah. Just hang on, everybody. Maybe you won't die of whatever's bothering you in between now and when we get around to... Yeah, you're never going to get around to it. You know why? Because you're stuffing your own pockets.
Framework for health and education and infrastructure development. The president's first agenda item is infrastructure development. During the rainy seasons, which last 6 to 9 months, half of the country is cut off. You can't get medicines, you can't get any kind of equipment there. And so he thought the first thing to...
And you can't loot the rest of the country. That's why they're building roads, is so they can move diamonds, gold, everything out of these areas, so they can create mines and all. It's the same old story.
Do was to ensure that the roads there are being done.
Is it a case of priority here? Because many are complaining.
It is a case of priority.
If there's still corruption, if there's still poverty and nothing has changed, is this the first step to take?
The first step is that people are separated, and they shouldn't be. People should be able to get through the rest of the country to provide the services. Where those services are available in Monrovia, in some of the urban areas, again, we're building.
Hey, wait a minute. What about the 11 months of the year where they're not cut off by the rainy season?
But there are areas in the southeast that has no access. And I think if we talk about leaving no one behind, we must ensure that everybody has access. He's also working on an agriculture part of it, which I think is our greatest strength.
There's access. The indigenous people have been moving around. Like I say, the rainy season only lasts a month or two, and the rest of the time they've all been quite comfortable being able to live on their own. But now you're making them dependent upon you by taking away all their land and turning it into agriculture, which you're going to make money off of. Slave labor, basically, probably really slave labor there. And, it's, as Lindsey Graham would say, a shit show. But when he says it, he's a shithead saying a shit show. I'm pointing out the reality of the situation. Okay, I've got a lot more here, but I'm sure that this has gone on quite long enough. What is it, 2 or 3 hours now I've been online? And I hope some of you got a chance to watch it, but if not, it'll post to my YouTube channel, and I'll share it with you in Progressive News and possibly to a few other groups. I think everybody will learn something by watching it, and I hope you enjoyed it. So this is Martin Drummond live with Progressive News, and I hope you enjoyed the show. See you next time. And I'll leave you with one of my songs. And I want to point out that I specially downloaded these pictures from the Zapruder film to show, if you watch this video carefully, see, that's his head being blown off, and it's flipping over the front of his face. He was clearly shot from behind, but not from the Texas School Book Depository. You can easily see the spray, and you can easily see the valley it creates, and it comes from the I forget what the name of the building was, but it's on the other side of the road they came down to get onto the plaza, and it hits him in the back of the head. It was an expert shot with a special round that absolutely decapitated him, basically. And I took it and I blew it up so I could see exactly where it came from and everything, and it's clear because I took shots of his head before and after the shot, and you could clearly see it came from behind and to the right, not to the left where the Texas School Book Depository was. Although there were all kinds of people shooting at him, I mean, clearly the evidence shows that there were more bullets and from different directions, but the one that really hit him, and I'm not saying Lee Oswald wasn't there shooting either, but I think it was somebody else. I think it was probably the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. He looked a lot like him, and he probably just made sure he was wearing the same clothes as Lee Harvey Oswald that day, and he probably did it. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald was spotted moments after the shooting, like within 10 or 20 seconds, in the break room, calmly drinking a Coke or something. So, anyway, I'll let you watch this. I mean, you can see this whole side of his head is intact. It hit him in the back of the left side of the head and blew his head off right to the front, causing his whole scalp to flip over and fall down on the, still attached at this end. If the bullet had hit him in the front, it wouldn't be attached across the front. It would have blown his head back off, and all the stuff you see about, and no offense to the guy who did JFK, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. Bodies jerk back and forth, whether the bullet enters from the back or the front. But clearly, it didn't hit him in the front. It hit him in the back of the head. And this song is about how the whole country was robbed in this coup murder that occurred. And I'm no fan of the Kennedys. You know, they're elitists. They're the beginning of democratic establishment and consolidated the establishment. And they were stupid enough to let a conservative, a Republican really, a fake Democrat, be vice president and ends up running the country and diving us. Kennedy had just called for removal of troops from Vietnam. And, all the establishment Democrats out there who still ooh and ah about LBJ, they're dumb fucks. And this was my first attempt at slide guitar, so don't be too critical. And clearly, America has always been a great country because of its people. And the people who supported Kennedy, and Kennedy was the best thing that ever happened up till then for minorities. And the people who supported that, clearly a great country with great people. It's just a few Americans that are the problem.
Was a long time before we all found out what it's all about. But we all found out what it's all about.
Yeah, and they did that with, like atomic testing of the bullet fragments. And there was at least one bullet fragment that didn't belong to Lee Oswald, because I refuse to call him Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Oswald's rifle. I actually believe that Lee Oswald was trying to prevent the assassination, and that he had managed to infiltrate the Cubans and the mafia, and he was quietly pretending to be what he'd been pretending to be, and it's obvious that he was groomed for intelligence. Being allowed to be a radar operator for the U-2 flights, and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, he runs off to Russia, and of course the Russians never trusted him, but he managed to marry a Russian girl. And I really, when I look at everything in its totality, I think he was a hero. I think he was secretly, and we know that he was hanging out with naval intelligence. He was a Marine, and he spent all of his time in the garage of the Naval Intelligence place in Dallas. You know, there's just way too much evidence that he was not what he seemed to be. And I think he was a really smart guy. And he was playing a part. See, you can see the damage path comes from this side. The right back of his head wasn't even affected. It hit him in the left side of the head and exited through his right temple. I mean, you can see the grass behind his head. I mean, I know that's sick, but you know, you gotta look at things like this, right? I mean, it disturbs me so much that I've spent many nights just crying, just thinking about how awful these things are. And they happen every day to millions, you know, over the years, to millions of people getting shot in the head and all that stuff. And just all these images just make me sick inside. But you've got to look at it. You got to look at this picture and see that's his skull, the inside of his skull flipped over and come out over this side of his head. That's why so many people make the mistake of saying, well, his ear got blown off. No, it didn't get blown off. It got covered up by his skull. Alright, so that's it for Progressive News with Martin, live with Martin Drummond on this November the 1st, 2019. Thanks for watching.